The bells never stopped ringing. From dawn until dusk, from dusk until dawn, the iron tongues of the church towers swung and clanged, announcing death after death after death. The sound echoed through the narrow streets of Florence, bouncing off stone walls, rattling shutters, filling the air with a rhythm that no one could escape. It was the heartbeat of a dying city. Smoke rose from pyres at the edge of town. Bodies were stacked like cordwood, wrapped in stained linen or not wrapped at all. The living moved like ghosts, eyes hollow, faces covered with cloths soaked in vinegar. They avoided each other. They avoided the dead. They avoided hope. And through the fog, through the smoke and the stench and the fear, a figure moved, dressed entirely in black. A long waxed coat that hung to the ankles, gloves of thick leather, a wide-brimmed hat, and the face hidden behind a mask shaped like the beak of a bird, long and curved and grotesque, with dark glass circles where the eyes should be. People crossed themselves when they saw him. Some fell to their knees. Others turned and ran. He was a plague doctor. He carried a wooden cane to examine the sick without touching them. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if time itself bent around him. He did not speak unless spoken to. He did not comfort. He did not promise. He simply recorded who was dying, who was dead, who might still be saved. To some, he was a savior. To others, an omen. To most, he was something worse, a reminder that the world had broken, that God had turned his face away, that no one, not the rich, not the holy, not the wise, could stop what was coming. But who were these doctors? Were they heroes who walked into hell to save the living? Were they charlatans, opportunists cloaked in superstition and theater? Or were they something far more tragic, men and women who believed they could fight death with reason, only to discover that reason was not enough? This is their story. The plague arrived in Europe in 1347, carried on ships from the east. It came to the port of Messina in Sicily, brought by Genoese traders fleeing the Mongol siege of Kaffa. The sailors were already dying, their skin blackened, their bodies swelled with lumps the size of apples. They coughed blood. They screamed in agony. And then they died. Within weeks, the plague spread to the mainland. Within months, it consumed Italy, France, Spain. Within 2 years, it had swept across the entire continent, from the Mediterranean to the North Sea, from the Atlantic to the steppes of Russia. It killed without mercy. It killed without logic. It killed the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the pious and the sinful. Entire villages were wiped out. Cities lost half their populations. Farms lay abandoned, crops rotting in the fields. The dead outnumbered the living. The symptoms were horrifying. It began with a fever, sudden, violent, burning through the body like wildfire. The victim would shiver uncontrollably, teeth chattering, skin slick with sweat. Within hours, the fever would spike so high that the person became delirious, thrashing in bed, crying out for water, for mercy, for God. Then came the swellings. Buboes, they were called. They appeared in the groin, the armpits, the neck, anywhere the lymph nodes clustered. They started as small, hard lumps beneath the skin, painful to the touch. But they grew rapidly, swelling to the size of eggs, then oranges, then fists. The skin stretched tight over them, turning purple, then black. The pain was excruciating. Victims could not move without agony. They could not lie down, could not sit, could not find any position that brought relief. Some buboes burst on their own, releasing thick, foul-smelling pus mixed with blood. When this happened, there was a chance slim, but real, that the person might survive. The body was purging the infection, fighting back. But more often, the buboes remained hard and swollen, the infection spreading deeper into the body, into the bloodstream, into the organs. The plague attacked in 3 forms. The most common was bubonic plague, named for the buboes. It spread through flea bites, from rats to humans, from humans to more fleas. It killed slowly over the course of days, sometimes a week. There was time to suffer, time to say goodbye, time to watch death approach. Then there was septicemic plague, when the bacteria entered the bloodstream directly. The skin turned black as the blood vessels died, as gangrene set in. Fingers and toes blackened and fell off. The nose, the ears, the lips turned dark and necrotic. Victims looked like corpses before they died. This form killed faster, within a day or two. There was no time for treatment, no time for prayer. And then there was pneumonic plague, the most terrifying of all. It attacked the lungs. Victims coughed violently, spitting up blood and frothy pink sputum. Every breath was agony. Every cough spread the disease to anyone nearby. It was airborne, passed from person to person through droplets in the air. It killed within hours. A man could wake up healthy and be dead by nightfall. Medieval medicine had no answer. Physicians trained in the universities of Paris and Bologna had studied the works of Galen and Hippocrates. They believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, and that illness came from an imbalance of these fluids. They prescribed bloodletting, purging, herbal remedies. They studied the stars, believing that planetary alignments caused disease. But none of it worked. The plague did not care about humors or horoscopes. It spread faster than anyone could understand. It killed faster than anyone could treat. And so the physicians fled. They abandoned their patients, their cities, their oaths. They locked themselves in country estates and prayed that the pestilence would pass them by. But some stayed, not because they were braver, not because they knew more, but because someone had to. In the chaos, cities began appointing official plague doctors medico della peste in Italian, médecin de la peste in French. These were not always the best physicians. Often, they were the youngest, the least experienced, the ones with nothing to lose. Sometimes they were barber surgeons, apothecaries, even lay people with no formal training. They were hired by city councils, paid a salary to treat the sick, record the dead, and enforce quarantine measures. They were given legal authority to enter any home, inspect any body, remove any corpse. They were, in a sense, the first public health officials, and they needed protection, not just from the plague itself, but from the people terrified, desperate, willing to blame anyone for the horror unfolding around them. The doctors needed a uniform, a symbol, something that marked them as separate, as sanctioned, as untouchable. They needed the mask. The man who created it was named Charles Delorme. He was a French physician, born in 1584, more than 2 centuries after the Black Death had first ravaged Europe. But the plague had never truly left. It returned in waves, every few decades, killing thousands. By the time Delorme was practicing medicine, plague outbreaks were a grim regularity. Delorme served as chief physician to King Louis XIII of France. He was educated, respected, well-connected. He had studied the writings of ancient and medieval doctors. He had treated nobles and commoners alike, and he had seen firsthand how quickly the plague could kill. In 1619, he designed a protective outfit for physicians working in plague-stricken cities. It was not the first attempt at protective clothing. Earlier doctors had worn long robes, gloves, and face coverings. But Delorme's design was different. It was systematic, comprehensive, and deeply rooted in the medical theories of his time. The outfit began with a long coat made of waxed leather or heavy canvas, treated with oils and resins to make it impermeable. The coat extended from the neck to the ankles, covering the entire body. The sleeves were long and tight at the wrists, tucked into thick leather gloves. The hem brushed the ground. leaving no gap for air or miasma to enter. Over the coat, the doctor wore a wide-brimmed hat, often made of leather or felt. The hat served multiple purposes. It identified the wearer as a physician, a figure of authority. It shaded the face, and it was believed to deflect bad air, which was thought to rise from the ground and the bodies of the sick. But the most iconic piece was the mask. It was shaped like the head of a bird, with a long curved beak extending 6 to 8 inches from the face. The beak was hollow, filled with aromatic substances, dried flowers, herbs, camphor, cloves, myrrh, rose petals, and sometimes vinegar-soaked sponges. The idea was that these strong scents would purify the air before it reached the doctor's lungs, filtering out the poisonous vapors believed to cause disease. The mask was made of leather, stiffened with wax or resin. The eye holes were covered with glass or crystal lenses, tinted red or clear, to protect the eyes from the corrupted air. Straps secured the mask tightly to the head, ensuring no gaps. The overall effect was terrifying. The doctor looked like a creature from a nightmare, part human, part bird, part demon. The beak gave the face an alien, predatory shape. The dark lenses made the eyes unreadable. The long coat and gloves eliminated any trace of humanity, any warmth, any recognizability. And that was in part the point. The mask was not just protection. It was a barrier. It separated the doctor from the patient, the living from the dying, the rational from the chaotic. It was a symbol of authority and detachment, a visual declaration that this person was different, operating under different rules, immune, or so they hoped, to the forces that were destroying everyone else. But beneath the mask, the doctors were just as afraid as everyone else. The theories that guided them were ancient, deeply flawed, and yet remarkably persistent. The dominant medical theory of the Middle Ages was the doctrine of the four humors, inherited from the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates and systematized by Galen in the 2nd century. According to this theory, the human body contained 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health depended on maintaining a perfect balance of these humors. Illness occurred when one humor became excessive or deficient. Each humor was associated with specific qualities. Blood was hot and moist. Phlegm was cold and moist. Yellow bile was hot and dry. Black bile was cold and dry. These qualities corresponded to the 4 elements: air, water, fire, and earth, and to the 4 seasons. The body was a microcosm of the universe, and disease was a disruption of cosmic harmony. Treatment, therefore, aimed to restore balance. If a patient had too much blood, physicians would perform bloodletting, opening a vein to drain the excess. If there was too much phlegm, they would prescribe emetics to induce vomiting or purgatives to clear the bowels. Herbal remedies were chosen based on their supposed qualities: hot herbs to counteract cold diseases, dry herbs to counteract moist diseases. But the plague did not fit neatly into this system. The symptoms were too varied, too violent, too unpredictable. Some victims developed buboes. Others did not. Some died within hours. Others lingered for days. The disease seemed to strike randomly, without regard for age, temperament, or humoral balance. Physicians searched for explanations. Some blamed planetary alignments. In 1345, medical faculty at the University of Paris issued a report attributing the plague to a conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius. This alignment, they argued, had corrupted the air, creating a pestilential vapor that spread disease. Others blamed earthquakes. It was believed that seismic activity released poisonous gases from deep within the earth, gases that rose into the atmosphere and poisoned the air. There were reports of strange mists and foul odors appearing before outbreaks, which seemed to confirm this theory. Still others blamed human sin. The plague was divine punishment. sent by God to chastise a wicked world. Preachers urged repentance, fasting, and prayer. Flagellants roamed the countryside, whipping themselves bloody in public displays of penance, believing that their suffering might appease God's wrath. But the most widespread theory was miasma. Miasma, bad air, was believed to be the primary cause of disease. It was thought to arise from rotting organic matter, stagnant water, swamps, garbage, and corpses. The air itself became corrupted, filled with invisible particles of decay that enter the body through the nose and mouth, poisoning the blood and organs. This theory shaped nearly every aspect of plague prevention and treatment. Cities ordered the removal of garbage and sewage. They drained swamps and cleaned streets. They burned aromatic woods and herbs to purify the air. They carried posies of flowers, the origin of the nursery rhyme, ring around the rosy, to ward off bad smells. And they designed the plague doctor's mask with its long beak filled with fragrant substances, believing that strong scents could neutralize the poisonous vapors. It was all wrong, of course. The plague was caused by bacteria, not bad air. It spread through fleas and direct contact, not through miasma. But the doctors did not know this. They could not know this. They were working with the best knowledge available to them, inherited from centuries of tradition, reinforced by observation that seemed to confirm their theories. And in some ways, their methods worked not because the theories were correct, but because the practices they inspired accidentally interrupted the chain of transmission. Imagine a morning in Venice, 1630. The city is in the grip of another plague outbreak. The canals, usually bustling with gondolas and merchants, are silent. The markets are closed. The churches are empty except for the dying. The Doge has ordered a strict quarantine. Anyone suspected of infection is taken to the Lazaretto, the plague island, and left there to recover or die. A plague doctor named Giovanni Filippo Ingrassia rises before dawn. He is not Venetian by birth. He came from Sicily decades ago, trained in medicine at the University of Padua, and stayed because Venice offered opportunities that his homeland did not. He is 53 years old, a widower. His wife and 2 children died in the last outbreak. He did not save them. He could not even touch them. He dresses slowly, methodically. First, the undershirt, soaked in vinegar. The fabric is cold and damp against his skin, but he believes it will protect him. Then the heavy coat, its surface slick with wax, smelling of beeswax and turpentine. The gloves, stiff and cracked from repeated use. The leather stained dark with old blood and pus. The hat, its brim casting his face in shadow. And finally, the mask. He lifts it with both hands, feeling its weight. The beak is filled with fresh herbs, rosemary, lavender, cloves, and a small sachet of camphor. The scent is strong, almost overwhelming, but it is better than the alternative. Better than the smell of death that waits outside. He straps the mask to his head, adjusting the leather bands, pressing the edges against his skin. The world narrows. His vision is limited to the small circles of glass. His breath echoes inside the hollow beak, loud and rhythmic, like the sound of waves in a shell. He picks up his cane, a long wooden rod with a curved handle, polished smooth from years of use. He will use it to lift blankets, to point, to keep distance. He will not touch anyone. He cannot afford to. He steps outside. The streets are empty. Shutters are closed. Doors are marked with red, crosses the sign of infection. A cart rattles past, piled with bodies wrapped in stained sheets. The driver does not look at him. No one looks at him. To acknowledge the plague doctor is to acknowledge the plague itself. Giovanni walks to the first house on his list. The door is ajar. He pushes it open with his cane. Inside, the smell is unbearable even through the herbs in his mask. Sweat, urine, feces, decay. A woman lies on a straw mattress. her face pale and slick with sweat, her neck swollen with black buboes the size of plums. Her husband kneels beside her, weeping, his hands clasped in prayer. A child no more than 5 huddles in the corner, silent, staring with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Giovanni does not speak. He examines the woman from a distance, using his cane to lift the blanket, to expose the buboes on her groin and armpit. He notes the size and color of the swellings, the fever, the labored breathing. He knows she will die, perhaps today, perhaps tomorrow. There is nothing he can do. He writes her name in his ledger, Maria Contarini, age 34, bubonic plague, terminal. He marks the house for quarantine. He instructs the husband to burn the bedding, to wash the floors with vinegar, to keep the child away from the body when death comes. The husband begs him, "Please, save her. You're a doctor. You must know something, anything." Giovanni does not answer. What can he say? That he has seen 1,000 cases like this? That none of his treatments have worked? That the only mercy he can offer is to record her name so that someone, someday, will know she existed? He turns and leaves. He visits 12 more houses that day. In some, the sick are already dead, their bodies stiff and cold, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. In others, they are too far gone to help, their buboes blackened and hard, their breath rattling in their chests. In a few, the infection is still early, and he prescribes what little he can herbal poultices to draw out the poison, bloodletting to balance the humors, prayers to Saint Sebastian, the patron saint of plague victims. He knows none of it will work, but he prescribes it anyway, because to do nothing is unbearable. By evening, he is exhausted. His back aches from the weight of the coat. His lungs burn from breathing through the herbs. His hands shake as he removes the mask, the straps leaving deep red marks on his skin. He returns home. He strips off the coat, the gloves, the hat. He washes his hands in vinegar, scrubs his face, burns the clothes he wore beneath the protective gear. He eats a small meal bread, cheese, wine. He does not taste it. He lies down in the dark and stares at the ceiling. Tomorrow he will do it again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until the plague ends, or until he joins the dead. Not all plague doctors were like Giovanni. Some were opportunists, drawn to the work by the promise of high pay and legal immunity. Some were incompetent, appointed because no one else would take the job. And some were outright frauds. In Marseille, during the outbreak of 1720, a plague doctor named Jean-Baptiste Bertrand became a local hero. He was a physician with the city's hospital, and when the plague struck, he volunteered to treat the sick. He walked the streets in his protective gear, visiting homes, administering what treatments he could, organizing the removal of bodies. The city council praised him. The people revered him. He was everything a plague doctor was supposed to be. But there were others. In Rome, during the outbreak of 1656, a plague doctor was arrested for theft. He had been entering the homes of the dying, ostensibly to treat them, but instead was looting their possessions. Jewelry, coins, silverware, anything of value. When confronted, he claimed he was only taking payment for his services. But the families of the dead testified that he had taken far more than his fee, that he had stripped rings from the fingers of corpses, that he had pried gemstones from religious icons. He was tried, convicted, and hanged. In London, during the Great Plague of 1665, there were reports of plague doctors who extorted money from desperate families. They would arrive at a home, examine the sick, and then demand exorbitant fees for their services. If the family could not pay, the doctor would leave and sometimes report the house to authorities as infected, ensuring it would be sealed and quarantined, condemning everyone inside to death. These stories, whether entirely true or exaggerated by fear and rumor, spread quickly. They fed the suspicion and mistrust that already surrounded the plague doctors. People began to wonder, were these men really trying to help? Or were they profiting from the disaster? The truth, as always, was complicated. Most plague doctors were neither heroes nor villains. They were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, trying to do a job that was impossible, dangerous, and often thankless. They were paid well because no one else would do the work. They were given legal protections because without them, they would be attacked, blamed, scapegoated. And yes, some of them took advantage. Some stole. Some lied. Some abandoned their duties when the danger became too great. But many did not. Many stayed. Many walked into the plague houses day after day, knowing that each visit might be their last, knowing that their treatments were useless, knowing that they were more likely to die than to save anyone. They stayed because someone had to. The people did not know what to make of the plague doctors. In some cities, they were respected, even revered. They were seen as brave souls willing to face death to help the living. They were paid, well, sometimes more than other physicians, sometimes given exemptions from taxes and military service. They were symbols of order in a world that had lost all sense of it. But in other places, they were feared. Their appearance was unnatural, monstrous. The mask, the coat, the cane, it all seemed designed to frighten rather than comfort. And in a time when fear and superstition ruled, when people believed that demons walked the earth and witches caused disease, the plague doctor looked like something unholy. Some believed the doctors themselves spread the plague, that they were agents of death, sent to finish what the pestilence had started, that the herbs in their masks were not protective, but poisonous, that they killed patients to increase their pay, which was sometimes calculated by the number of dead they recorded. In Toulouse, a plague doctor was chased through the streets by an angry mob. They accused him of poisoning wells, of spreading disease deliberately. He barely escaped with his life, fleeing the city under cover of darkness. In Naples, during the outbreak of 1656, rumors spread that the plague doctors were in league with the Spanish authorities, that they were using the plague as an excuse to seize property and consolidate power. Riots broke out. Several doctors were attacked. One was killed, his body left in the street as a warning. Children were taught to fear the mask. Mothers would tell their children, "Be good, or the plague doctor will come for you." The figure became a boogeyman, a symbol of death itself. And yet, paradoxically, the doctors were also seen as necessary. When someone fell ill, when the fever spiked and the buboes appeared, families would send for the plague doctor, begging him to come, to help, to do something. They feared him, but they needed him. This contradiction, fear and need, suspicion and desperation, defined the plague doctor's existence. He was both savior and monster, both healer and harbinger. He occupied a liminal space, neither fully part of the living world nor the world of the dead. He was the boundary itself. For all their strangeness, for all the fear and superstition that surrounded them, the plague doctors were not entirely wrong. They believed that disease spread through bad air, miasma, as it was called. They believed that foul smells, rotting matter, and stagnant water produced poisonous vapors that infected the lungs and corrupted the blood. This was not accurate in the way we understand disease today. The plague was caused by bacteria Yersinia pestis, spread by fleas that lived on rats. It had nothing to do with air quality. But the doctors' methods, based on their flawed understanding, accidentally worked in some ways. The long coats and gloves created a physical barrier between the doctor and the patient. This reduced the chance of flea bites, of contact with infected bodily fluids, of transmission through touch. The masks, while not filtering bacteria, did keep the doctors from inhaling droplets if a patient coughed or sneezed, which was especially important during pneumonic plague, the airborne form of the disease. The herbs in the beet cloves, camphor, myrrh had mild antiseptic properties. They would not kill bacteria, but they might have reduced some microbial load in the air. More importantly, the strong scents masked the smell of death and decay, making it psychologically easier for the doctors to do their work. The cane, used to maintain distance, was a crude but effective form of social distancing. It kept the doctor from direct contact, reducing the risk of transmission. And the quarantine measures the doctors enforced, isolating the sick, burning contaminated bedding, marking infected houses, these were among the most effective responses to the plague. They slowed the spread. They saved lives. The plague doctors did not understand why these methods worked. They operated on theory, on tradition, on desperate hope. But in doing so, they stumbled upon practices that would become the foundation of modern epidemiology. They were not heroes. They were not villains. They were scientists working with incomplete knowledge, doing the best they could in the worst possible circumstances. And that, perhaps, is the most human thing about them. The plague eventually receded, not because of medicine, but because the disease ran its course. Populations developed some immunity. Rats and fleas died off. Trade routes shifted. Quarantine measures became more effective. Better sanitation, better housing, better nutrition, all of these contributed to the decline of the great pandemics. By the 18th century, the last major outbreak had passed. The plague doctors were no longer needed, but the image remained. The mask, once a symbol of terror, became something else. It appeared in art, in theater, in carnival costumes. In Venice, during the annual carnival, people wore plague doctor masks as part of elaborate disguises, a macabre nod to history, a way of reclaiming the fear and turning it into spectacle. The mask became a symbol of mystery, of the unknown, of the boundary between life and death. It appeared in literature, in films, in video games. It became shorthand for plague, for pandemic, for the fragility of civilization. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the image of the plague doctor circulated widely on social media, a reminder that humanity has faced this before, that we have survived before, that the terror we feel is not new. But the mask also reminds us of something darker. It reminds us that knowledge is incomplete, that the tools we use to fight death are often crude, improvised, born of desperation rather than certainty, that the people who walk into the worst moments of history, the doctors, the nurses, the caregivers, do so not because they have all the answers, but because someone has to try. The plague doctors were not superhuman. They were terrified. They made mistakes. They believed things that were wrong. They failed more often than they succeeded. But they showed up. They walked into the smoke and the stench and the dying streets, dressed in their strange armor, carrying their wooden canes, breathing through their beak masks. They recorded the dead. They comforted the living when they could. They enforced the rules that kept the plague from spreading even further. They were not saviors. They were witnesses. And in a world that had lost all sense of order, that was enough. Centuries later, we look back at them with a mixture of fascination and pity. We see the masks in museums displayed behind glass, and we marvel at how strange they are, how alien. We read the accounts of their work, the ledgers, the letters, the city records, and we try to imagine what it must have been like to live in that time, to walk those streets, to face that kind of death. But we do not have to imagine. We have faced our own plagues. We have worn our own masks. We have stood in our own streets, empty and silent, and wondered when it would end. The plague doctors remind us that this is not new. that humanity has always lived on the edge of catastrophe, that we have always had to choose between fear and action, between running and standing still. And they remind us that the people who face death are not always the bravest or the wisest. Sometimes they are just the ones who could not look away. The bells have stopped ringing. The pyres have burned out. The streets are slowly filling again with the sounds of life, merchants calling, children laughing, the clatter of carts on cobblestones. The plague has passed, for now. It will return someday in some form. It always does. But for now, the city breathes. And somewhere, in a small house near the Rialto Bridge, a man removes his mask. He sets it on the table, beside his ledger, beside his cane. He washes his hands. He eats a simple meal. He sleeps, finally, without dreams. He is not a hero. He is not a villain. He is just a man who did what he could, with the knowledge he had, in a world that was falling apart. And that, in the end, is all any of us can do. The plague doctors faced death not as heroes or villains, not as saints or charlatans, but as humans trying to understand the unknowable. They wore their masks not to hide, but to survive. They carried their canes not to strike, but to reach. They walked into the darkness not because they were fearless, but because they believed, however faintly, however foolishly, that there might be a way through. They were wrong about many things, but they were right about one, that in the face of death, the only thing worse than trying and failing is not trying at all. The mask endures, not as a relic of ignorance, but as a symbol of persistence, of the human refusal to surrender, even when the odds are impossible, even when the enemy is invisible, even when the only weapon is hope. And so we remember them, not as the doctors who cured the plague, they did not. Not as the doctors who understood it, they did not, but as the doctors who faced it, who walked into the smoke and the fear and the dying, and did not turn away, who wore the mask and carried the cane and recorded the names of the dead so that someone someday would know they were there. They were the doctors behind the mask, and their story is ours.